Welcome to Wealth and Means. Advice dressed up like hard work.
Good day to our members in Canada, Germany, Hong Kong, India, Israel, the United Kingdom, and the United States. It's episode 46. Let's get into it.
This week's episode is about a single stubborn habit of ours. We keep staring at the object, the model, the robot, the gold bar, the tradition, the headline, the thing that's easy to point at, and almost every story we found this week says the same quiet thing back. That's not where the value went. A capable AI model now fits on a graphics card you could buy at a mall, and Stripe just paid more than $7 billion for the switchboard that decides which model gets the job. A public company discovered it can rent out robots instead of selling them. A media company found that half its revenue comes from the room, not the reporting. And a rare earth ticker moved before anybody could explain why. Then we'll do Wake Up Ready, and the week ahead is unusually loaded. Jackson Hole, a new Fed chair's first keynote, personal consumption data, a GDP revision, the biggest earnings print of the quarter, and a $1 trillion filing that's sitting on a 15-day clock. In the Knowledge Bomb, we're going to talk about the least glamorous source of return in personal finance, which is simply auditing the money you already have. Humor Me takes on a seasonal American ritual involving a vault in Kentucky. The greater debate puts Jonathan Haidt across from Steven Pinker on whether the conservative instinct is something civilization needs or something it learns to override. And Let's Invent Again is Andrew Viterbi, who solved the problem of pulling a signal out of noise, never patented it, and then made his fortune somewhere else entirely.
Which is the thread. Every one of these is a story about somebody looking at the wrong thing while the interesting part happened one layer over.
Let's go.
Each week we explore ideas that help you pause, reflect, and think more deeply about the opportunities all around you.
It's the perfect mix. A little information, a few stats, some real-world insights, and just enough deep talk to make you feel smarter before your second cup of coffee. A quick thank you to our sponsor, agentweekly.ai, chronicling the absurd, the ambitious, and the algorithmically challenged corners of the AI agent economy. What you didn't see in the news this week starts with a pretty consequential sentence. A legitimately capable AI model now fits on the kind of computer a determined hobbyist might already own. Alibaba's Qwen 3.827b is an open-weight model, and the people in the local AI community aren't reporting the usual party trick where it answers trivia and writes a haiku. They're reporting agentic work. One Reddit user had it write a game, test the game, convert it into an Android app, and build the package, all of it locally, none of it round-tripping to a server. According to local AI, the quantized version fits on a 24-gigabyte graphics card. That's a card a gamer might already have under the desk. The texture here is what the number actually means. For 3 years, the working assumption in this industry has been that real inference is a metered utility. You rent it, you get billed per token, and the meter runs whether you're doing something valuable or not. Every improvement at this size chips a little more off that assumption. It doesn't have to beat the frontier model. It only has to be good enough that the marginal task isn't worth renting. This surfaced now because the weights finally landed and developers spent the week doing real things with them rather than benchmarking them.
Which is bad news for the business model called please insert credit card to continue thinking.
And that same pattern, value moving somewhere other than the model itself, shows up in the biggest deal of the week. Stripe agreed to buy OpenRouter for more than $7 billion. OpenRouter is a switchboard. Developers send one request through one interface, and it gets routed among hundreds of models based on price, capability, or whichever one happens to be up at that moment. Bloomberg reported the deal on August 16th, and Stripe confirmed it publicly. Now here's the number that should stop you. OpenRouter raised a Series B in May of this year at roughly $1.3 billion. 3 months later, it sold for more than $7 billion. That's about a 5.4 times markup in a single quarter on a company most people outside of developer tooling had never heard of. It sounds like plumbing until you notice what the plumbing controls: model selection, token consumption, metering, and eventually the payment itself. The first order read is that Stripe just bought a foothold in AI. The second order read is more interesting. If models become genuinely interchangeable, then the pricing power doesn't sit with whoever builds the best one. It sits with whoever decides which one gets the work. Stripe didn't buy an AI company. It bought the toll booth.
$7 billion for the layer that nobody thought was a layer.
Now take the same question and give it legs. AIXC Holdings said this week that it's moving away from a digital asset treasury strategy and toward what it's calling physical AI. And the pivot came with something more useful than a press release. Its RoboShare unit runs a marketplace for renting robots. And according to the company's August 18th announcement, it completed its first paid commercial order. 6 robots deployed to an entertainment event in Malibu. 6 robots, 1 party. Let's be honest about the scale. This is very early and very speculative, and a first commercial order is not a business. But the model underneath it is the part worth holding on to. Expensive capital equipment doesn't have to be owned to be useful. It can be rented, dispatched, maintained, and monetized by utilization, the way scaffolding, cranes, and cloud servers already are. If humanoid robots turn out to cost as much as a truck, then the economics that matter aren't the manufacturing economics. They're the fleet economics: occupancy rate, downtime, maintenance cost per hour. Attention arrived this week because the company paired the strategic pivot with an actual paid deployment rather than a slide.
So robots as a service, which was inevitable because apparently every noun eventually becomes as a service.
Unfortunately, yes. And not every algorithmic breakout this week involved robots or AI, or for that matter, anything particularly new. One of YouTube's strangest surges was Bible and faith lessons. According to Trend Report's creator data, the niche went from roughly 174,000 weekly views to nearly 49 million in its latest weekly breakout window. While creators added more than 100 new videos, and 40 of those were already showing sustained ranking momentum. Put those two facts next to each other. Supply and demand accelerated at the same time in a category nobody would describe as emerging. Scripture is not a new subject. It has, by most counts, a couple of thousand years of prior coverage. What's new is a format and a creator cluster that the recommendation system suddenly decided to route traffic toward. That's the part worth understanding if you make anything for an audience. Discovery systems don't require novel subjects. They require novel packaging of familiar subjects, and they'll rediscover a mature category the moment somebody finds the shape that travels. The first order effect is a lot of new channels. The second order effect is that the topic is saturated is a much weaker excuse than it used to be.
So apparently even Ecclesiastes can get an algorithm update.
There really is nothing new under the sun. And speaking of things that have been around a long time, astronomers found a planet that appears to have skipped a fairly important rule of planet formation. It's called GJ 523b, and it's about 2.5 times Earth's radius, but roughly 23.5 times Earth's mass. Science and space sites both covered it this week as a mega-Earth, extraordinarily dense, apparently mostly rock, and conspicuously short on the thick hydrogen-helium envelope that anything that massive is supposed to have. Here's why that's strange. The rough rule is that once a forming planet gets to around 20 Earth masses, it starts hoovering up gas and becomes a Jupiter. This one didn't. It's only about 170 million years old. It whips around an orange K dwarf every 17.75 days, and it sits about 87 light-years away. It's also the first exoplanet cataloged by the Wisconsin Center for Origins Research, with the work led by a graduate student named Max Croft. Maybe it lost its atmosphere. Maybe a collision built it. Nobody knows yet, and the research is still awaiting peer review. It matters because exceptions are where models get better. A rule that never breaks teaches you nothing. It surfaced this week when the finding escaped astronomy circles and started showing up in general science coverage.
23 Earths of mass and almost no atmosphere.
Basically, the cosmic version of skipping leg day and somehow becoming entirely leg. Which brings us from a planet that broke the expected pattern to a search query that barely qualifies as news at all: split superlatives. That was the theme of Thursday's New York Times Strands puzzle. The grid split familiar expressions: bee's knees, cat's pajamas, gold standard, very best, with the words "you're the" running through the middle of the board. According to the Google Trends data in our radar, searches for that phrase jumped roughly 600% and hit about 10,000 searches, while still sitting comfortably outside the day's top 10 trends. Think about the shape of that. There was no event, no celebrity, no product launch, no filing, no death. Just several thousand strangers encountering the same intentionally confusing phrase within a few hours of each other and independently asking the internet to explain it. That's a synchronized moment of confusion, and search is now one of the only instruments that can see one. The reason it matters is that a rising query doesn't always mean rising interest in a subject. Sometimes it means a lot of people hit the same wall at the same time. Attention popped almost instantly with the August 20th puzzle, and it'll probably be gone by Monday.
10,000 people independently typing, "Am I stupid or is this puzzle weird?"
Basically, one of Google's core businesses. And that speed of distribution shows up in language more broadly. Kinda Chic may have completed an entire internet life cycle in roughly one summer. The phrase became a template for reframing ordinary behavior as deliberate style. Repeat an outfit, stay home on a Friday, eat dinner alone, whatever it is, add kinda chic, and it's a choice instead of a default. The Guardian reported searches were up thousands of percent, and the format had spread across Instagram, TikTok, celebrity accounts, and brand copy. Then came phase two, which is the part that used to take years. Everyone noticed that everyone was using it. Marie Claire was writing about the backlash this week, and kinda not chic is now part of the joke. Here's why it matters beyond fashion. Format compression is a real cost. A phrase can now travel from novel to ubiquitous to parody in less time than it takes a large advertiser to get a campaign through legal review.
Somewhere a brand manager has a kind of chic campaign scheduled for October and is learning something about depreciation.
And if kinda chic proves that internet culture can turn anything into a format, Chanty Beluga proves it doesn't even need a premise. Chanty Beluga is a fictional woman created by the comedian Courtney O'Donnell. That's it. That's the bit. The joke is largely that her name is Chanty Beluga, and that she appears in aggressively normal situations, ordering a coffee, checking into somewhere, simply existing out loud as Chanty Beluga. According to People, the character has now generated millions of views, fan accounts, invented backstory, and at one point a reference from Major League Baseball. Notice what the audience did there. They didn't consume the joke. They annexed it. They started producing lore for a character with no lore, which is a thing that used to require a franchise, a writer's room, and about $400 million. It matters because remixability may now be worth more than complexity. A joke with a hole in the middle of it invites people to fill the hole, and the filling is the distribution. Chanty popped this week because she escaped the original account and became communal property.
An entire cinematic universe built on a name and absolutely nothing else.
But the strangest signal on YouTube this week was much narrower and much more useful. CLEP Algebra. That's the college-level examination program, the exams that let students earn college credit by testing out of a subject instead of sitting through it. According to Trend Report, that phrase was appearing in new video titles at roughly 85 times the previous week's rate. 85 times, not 85%. This is not a mass culture story, and that's exactly the point. Hyper-specific instructional niches can hit an algorithmic pocket where audience intent is extraordinarily high and content supply is still small, and intent is worth vastly more than attention. Somebody searching CLEP Algebra is not browsing. They have a test date, a tuition bill, and a problem with a deadline attached to it. If you're thinking about creator economics, 100,000 people urgently trying to solve one defined problem is very often a better market than 10 million people scrolling past you pleasantly. The signal broke this week because supply suddenly started chasing that demand, which usually means somebody found out the demand was there.
The narrower the search, the shorter the distance to a wallet.
Which brings us to the actual business of media. Ben Smith, the co-founder of Semaphore, told The Verge's Decoder podcast this week that roughly half of Semaphore's revenue comes from events, from what he calls convening. Half. Sit with that for a second. A digital news company whose product is journalism. And the largest single line on the revenue statement is assembling the right people in the same room and charging somebody for the privilege. The texture is that this isn't a fallback. It's a design choice, and it inverts the last 20 years of digital media strategy, which was to maximize the number of people who saw the thing and then sell that number to advertisers. Convening does the opposite. It monetizes a small, concentrated, extremely valuable group, and the journalism becomes the reason those people trust the invitation. The first-order consequence is that newsletters, podcasts, and named personalities stop being the product and start being distribution for the product. The second-order consequence is that institutional media and the creator economy are now running the same playbook from opposite directions. It surfaced this week because Smith laid the economics out more plainly than most media executives ever do.
which means the future of digital media might include a surprisingly large number of folding chairs.
Very expensive folding chairs. And that idea that the value sits in a place other than the obvious one shows up in India this week too. Awarapan 2 opened on August 14th, nearly 2 decades after the original film became a cult favorite. Bollywood Hungama reported a strong opening, and Indian Express coverage showed the sequel racing past what the original movie earned across its entire theatrical run. That's the interesting part. Not that a sequel sold tickets, that a film which was not a commercial success in 2007 turned out to have been quietly accumulating value the whole time, through streaming, through its soundtrack, through nostalgia, through a fandom that had 19 years to grow without anybody monetizing it. Studios spend enormous effort trying to manufacture that on day one. This is the opposite, dormant cultural equity that appreciated in a vault nobody was checking. The second-order implication is that a library's value isn't its box office history. It's the size of the audience that would show up if you gave them a reason to. Attention accelerated the moment the film opened, because that dormant base converted into current ticket sales almost overnight.
19 years is a long time to hold a position, but the return was apparently worth it.
And we'll finish with the tape doing something before the story is obvious. Rare Element Resources, ticker REEMF on the OTC market, went from trading fewer than 200,000 shares on August 12th to millions of shares a day as the move began, and the stock rose sharply alongside it. Elevated volume then persisted across several sessions, which is the part that separates this from a single spasm. Now, the company's tied to a United States rare earth project, so there's an obvious strategic minerals narrative sitting right there, ready to be picked up. But here's what makes it belong in this segment. I could not find one clean, same-week announcement that neatly explains a liquidity shift of that magnitude. No filing, no contract, no permit. Sometimes emerging attention is a news story. Sometimes the attention itself is the story, and the explanation shows up 2 weeks later looking like it was obvious all along. That's the whole thesis of this segment in one ticker. The tape changed before anybody could tell you why. That's what you didn't see in the news. Now let's wake up ready. The anchor of the week is Jackson Hole, and this one isn't routine. The Kansas City Fed's symposium runs Thursday the 27th through Saturday the 29th, and Kevin Warsh delivers his first keynote as Fed chair on Friday morning. This year's theme is Financial Innovation, Implications for Payments and Policy, which is not a theme central banks pick by accident. Here's the specific thing to listen for. Whether Warsh treats private payment rails and stablecoins as a consumer protection issue or as a monetary transmission issue, those are two completely different speeches. The first one is regulatory housekeeping. The second one says the Fed thinks its policy rate might not reach the economy the way it used to.
The theme is the message. They pick it in the spring.
What's already priced is a hawkish Fed. Futures have swung hard from the cut consensus earlier this year to roughly 65% odds of a hike at the September meeting, largely on energy costs tied to the Iran conflict and on doubt about how much patience this Fed has for a sticky inflation print. So the baseline going in is higher for longer, and the risk isn't that Warsh confirms it. The risk is what he says about plumbing. If he frames private payment rails as a genuine competitor for bank deposits, the thing that reprices first isn't the front end of the curve, it's regional bank funding costs and the deposit beta trade, because that's where deposit flight actually shows up on an income statement.
The keynote moves the headlines. The theme moves the regionals.
Then Friday morning also brings July personal consumption expenditures, the Fed's preferred inflation measure, and the number inside the number is core services excluding housing. Specifically, watch whether the crude move from the Iran situation is staying contained in headline or bleeding into core. Headline energy is a tax on consumers. Core pass-through is a policy problem. With 65% odds of a September hike already in the market, a contained core print pulls that back toward a hold and steepens the curve. A hot one does something less obvious. The first move isn't in equities, it's in the 2-year and the dollar. And the thing that actually breaks is emerging market local currency debt, where a stronger dollar does the damage long before the Fed does anything at all.
Nobody hedges the second-order casualty until it's already bleeding.
Thursday brings the second estimate of second quarter GDP, and please ignore the headline number because it's the wrong line. The line that matters is real final sales to private domestic purchasers. That's GDP with inventories and trade stripped out, and it's the closest thing we have to a clean read on underlying demand. Consensus expects only a modest revision, so the market's carrying essentially no risk premium on this release. Here's the scenario nobody's positioned for. Headline holds up, while final domestic demand revises down. That combination means the growth came from inventory building, not from buying, and inventory builds are a forward negative for goods volumes about 2 quarters out. If you see it, the place it shows up first is freight and trucking rates, not consumer stocks.
Inventory is just demand you haven't been paid for yet.
Wednesday after the close is Nvidia, reporting its second fiscal quarter against guidance of roughly $91 billion in revenue, plus or minus 2%. The signal is not the beat. Everybody beats. The signal is the language in the guide, whether management describes the constraint as supply or describes it as demand. Supply-constrained language means the backlog is intact and the cycle has runway. Demand language, even hedged, means the cycle is turning, and it'll be the first time anyone said so. Options are implying a mid-single-digit one-day move, which tells you the market expects noise, not a regime change. The second-order consequence isn't in the stock. Nvidia's index weight is large enough that the interesting instrument is the spread between the equal weight and cap weight S and P. That spread is a direct read on whether the rest of the market can stand up without it. And the cleanest derivative exposure sits in the Korean and Taiwanese supply chain, which trades the guide before New York opens.
One company sentence structure, 500 companies Thursday.
And in capital markets. OpenAI submitted a confidential draft S1 to the SEC on June 8th, with Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley leading, targeting a listing somewhere between Labor Day and Thanksgiving, and reportedly aiming at a valuation above $1 trillion against a last private mark of $852 billion from its March round. Here's the concrete signal, because it's a clock and not a vibe. The public S1 typically hits Edgar about 15 days before a roadshow starts. So if that document appears in the next 2 weeks, September is real. If it doesn't, the window slides into the fourth quarter and starts competing with Anthropic, which filed confidentially on June 1st with an October target and a last private mark of $965 billion. Two of the largest offerings ever attempted filed 9 days apart, chasing the same book.
$2 trillion stories, one pool of institutional money.
And the strategic angle is the part that's getting underplayed. The offering reportedly includes a dedicated retail allocation, which is unusual at this size and tells you the sponsors want a distribution story, not just a price. That matters for who wins and who loses on the other side. If it prices well, the immediate beneficiaries aren't just the company. They're the closed-end funds, pre-IPO SPVs, and secondary platforms that have been carrying OpenAI exposure at private marks and finally get a public print to mark against. If it prices wide, the damage doesn't land on institutions who bought at the deal price. It lands on the retail buyers who paid a markup for SPV access in the secondary market over the last 18 months. And that repricing would be the first real stress test of that whole distribution channel.
Access has a price, and the price is usually the return.
Geopolitics, with an actual capital consequence attached. On August 7th, the Senate passed the Lindsey Graham Sanctioning Russia and Iran Act by 86-11. It authorizes tariffs of up to 100% on the largest purchasers of Russian oil and gas, and it gives the president waiver authority on the Russia-related pieces. The House has been in recess and returns in September, so the specific thing to watch is whether that waiver language survives markup intact. Broad waiver authority means this is a bargaining chip. Narrowed waiver authority means it's an instrument. Crude already carries an Iran risk premium, but the Russia tariff scenario is essentially unpriced in Indian refining margins, and India, alongside China, is exactly who largest purchaser describes. If the waiver narrows, the trade that moves isn't oil. It's the discount Indian refiners have been paying on Russian barrels, which has functioned as a quiet subsidy to their margins for 4 years and would evaporate first.
The tariff is aimed at Moscow. The margin compression lands everywhere.
My personal watch for this week is small and free. The Kansas City Fed posts the Jackson Hole program and paper titles shortly before the symposium opens on Thursday evening. Read the paper titles before you read a single word of coverage about the keynote. The keynote tells you what the Fed wants to say this month. The The papers tell you what the Fed is worried about 18 months from now, and that gap has been the more profitable read in almost every year I've watched it.
And that is how you wake up ready. All right, knowledge bomb. Most people think wealth disappears dramatically. A market crash, a bad investment, a recession. Usually it leaks. A forgotten subscription, a duplicate charge, cash sitting in the wrong account, a stock position that quietly became too large, an old beneficiary designation nobody's checked in years. None of these feels urgent. That's why they survive. So one of the simplest wealth habits is also one of the most important. Audit your money. Regularly open every account and look at what's actually happening. Start with transactions. Look for fraud, errors, duplicate charges, fees, and financial zombies, the things you stopped using but never stopped paying for. Streaming services, software, gym memberships, insurance add-ons, free trials that converted. The modern economy is very good at turning temporary decisions into permanent withdrawals. Click once, pay forever. Then look at balances. Every meaningful pile of cash should have a purpose. If money's sitting in checking or a low-yield account simply because you forgot about it, that's not a strategy. That's inertia. Ask one question: why is this money here? If you don't have a good answer, reconsider where it belongs. Then look at concentration. This one often arrives disguised as success. A stock goes up fivefold and suddenly an investment that started as a small position controls a huge part of your financial future. Same with employer stock, crypto, real estate, or several assets that all depend on the same outcome. So ask, if this fell 50% tomorrow, would it annoy me or change my life? That tells you more about concentration risk than any arbitrary rule. Then inspect the plumbing. Bank insurance limits, transfer limits, credit utilization, retirement contribution limits, beneficiaries, account titles, and whether someone you trust could even find all these accounts if something happened to you. Because complexity itself becomes risk. 10 accounts, 7 cards, 3 old retirement plans, a forgotten HSA, an old brokerage account. At some point, more accounts stop creating flexibility and start creating places for mistakes to hide. So here's the habit. Once a month, scan. Once a quarter, inspect. Transactions, balances, concentration, structure. Then fix what you find. Cancel the subscription. Move the cash. Dispute the charge. Rebalance the position. Update the beneficiary. Consolidate the account. Because spotting financial friction without removing it is just sophisticated procrastination. We spend enormous energy asking how to earn another percentage point. Sometimes the easier return is simply stopping money from leaking out of the system you already have. Wealth needs maintenance. Audit it, clean it up, then do it again. Because the money you protect spends exactly the same as the money you earn. And that's your knowledge bomb.
Humor me. Today, we need to talk about political folklore, because there's a fascinating inversion in how we handle seasonal myths in this country, depending entirely on the size of the jurisdiction. At the local level, every February, a mayor puts on a top hat, drags a bewildered marmot out of a stump in Pennsylvania, and asks it to forecast the macroeconomic conditions for winter apparel. We all laugh. We all politely agree it's a joke. But at the national level, politicians have their own groundhog, except instead of predicting spring, it pretends to predict fiscal responsibility. I'm talking, of course, about the Let's Audit Fort Knox polemic. It happens like clockwork. A candidate running low on poll numbers suddenly grabs a microphone and demands we storm the vault in Kentucky to make sure the gold's actually still there, as if the Treasury Department's been sneaking bricks out in a canvas tote bag to cover a bad quarter at the roulette table. If you look closely, you can actually break these Fort Knox auditors into a very strict taxonomy. First, you've got the traditional gold bug, who fundamentally believes the year 1913 was a tragic mistake. Second, you've got the deep web guy, who's convinced the bars were hollowed out and replaced with tungsten by a shadow government. And finally, you've got the desperate incumbent, who just needs a 30-second soundbite that includes the words transparency, fiat, and bullion. But let's follow this to its absurd logical conclusion. Let's say they get the mandate. They open the doors. They count all 4,500 metric tons. Yep, it's all there. What then? We haven't backed the dollar with gold since 1971. Confirming the physical presence of yellow metal in a Kentucky vault has the exact same macroeconomic utility as confirming my parents kept my pristine collection of first edition Beanie Babies in their attic. It's deeply nostalgic. It feels comforting, and it's entirely useless as a mechanism for global liquidity. If we're going to spend millions of taxpayer dollars auditing obsolete reserves just to make a rhetorical point, why stop at gold? I want a bipartisan congressional committee to march down to the strategic blockbuster video reserve and verify that we've still got 3 million copies of Jerry Maguire on VHS, just in case the cloud goes down and the internet stops working. So the next time you see someone in a tailored suit demanding a national recount of the shiny rocks, don't adjust your portfolio. Just remember, it's not a monetary policy. It's just a politician looking for their shadow. Only this shadow means 6 more weeks of performative outrage. Back to the markets.
There are debates that stop your scroll, and there are debates that clear a dinner table. It's time for the greater debate. This is the second kind, because one side says some traditions are load-bearing, the other side says so was the divine right of kings, and suddenly everybody at the table becomes extremely interested in the dishwasher. A lecture hall, late. 2 lecterns angled slightly toward each other rather than toward the audience. No slides. 2 glasses of water, both untouched, because neither man plans to pause. The room came for a fight between the left and the right, and it's about to get something considerably more uncomfortable. An argument about whether your political opponent is running different software or just running it badly. One clarification before anybody reaches for the word chromosomal. Neither man is claiming there's a tiny conservative gene sitting next to the one for eye color. They agree on something more interesting than that. The mind isn't infinitely programmable. Temperament has biological roots. Moral intuitions arrive partly assembled. Jonathan Haidt goes first. He doesn't open with a definition. He opens by attacking the assumption underneath the whole evening. You think reason's running the meeting. It usually isn't. You make the judgment first. Something feels noble or disgusting or disloyal, and then your mind gets to work explaining why. Intuition's the elephant. Reason's the rider. The rider can steer sometimes. But if the elephant wants to go left, the rider will produce an extremely sophisticated explanation for why left was obviously the rational destination all along. A few laughs, he tightens it. Progressives concentrate moral attention on harm and fairness. Who's suffering? Who's being cheated? Those are enormous achievements, and I don't want to lose them, but conservatives hear additional frequencies. Loyalty, authority, sanctity, obligation. Who belongs to us? What do we owe the institution? Which boundaries shouldn't casually be crossed? And I want to say plainly, those aren't psychological debris. They're social technology. A military unit can't run on individual compassion. A family can't renegotiate every obligation every morning. Courts depend on respect for legitimacy. Money works because strangers trust rules they didn't personally design. Openness is brilliant at discovering what should change. Preservation is brilliant at remembering that change has costs. That lands. Steven Pinker doesn't flinch. Evolution also gave us revenge. He lets it sit. It gave us tribal hatred, dominance, sexual jealousy, magical thinking, fear of outsiders, a real appetite for punishing heretics. The fact that an instinct helped a group survive 10,000 years ago tells you nothing about whether it deserves authority over modern life. Natural isn't the same as good. And the entire project of civilization is learning to distrust certain impulses. You feel revenge. The court asks you to file a complaint. You distrust the foreigner. Commerce gives you a reason to trade with him. You think the illness is punishment from the gods. Science asks you to examine the pathogen. The room gets quieter because his second argument isn't theoretical. Longer lives, lower infant mortality, expanding literacy, less extreme poverty, steep declines in most forms of violence. And what produced those? Not greater obedience to inherited authority. People questioned kings, questioned churches, questioned slavery, questioned torture, questioned whether women were property. Again and again, somebody looked at a tradition carrying enormous social legitimacy and said, "Prove it." He turns. So tell me, if preservation deserves moral weight because institutions contain inherited wisdom, how do you distinguish accumulated wisdom from accumulated injustice? The audience makes that small involuntary sound audiences make when somebody hits bone. Haidt absorbs it, and then he does the only smart thing available, which is to concede. You're right. Traditions can be monstrous. Authority becomes tyranny. Loyalty becomes nationalism. Sanctity becomes persecution. Groups bind people together by giving them somebody to hate, and I'm not going to defend a single one of those. Then he turns the blade. But your history has a selection problem. We remember the reformers who were right, Galileo's in the textbook, the thousands who challenged established knowledge and were spectacularly, dangerously wrong are not. Every society produces reformers, prophets, utopians, revolutionaries, cranks. Some abolish slavery, others abolish property rights and discover famine. Some challenge scientific orthodoxy and cure a disease, others challenge it and sell you crystals. Openness generates variation. It doesn't guarantee improvement. Institutions are civilization's memory. A norm that survived for generations may contain knowledge nobody alive can currently articulate. And yes, you can absolutely remove a load-bearing wall because the room would look better without it. The architectural argument happens about 3 seconds later. There's the laugh. Pinker answers without defensiveness because he agrees with more of this than the caricature allows. I'm not proposing permanent revolution. Liberal civilization runs on institutions. Courts, science, markets, constitutions, professional standards. Reason needs structures that preserve knowledge. My objection isn't to institutions. It's to treating reverence as evidence. The scientific method's an institution precisely because it institutionalizes doubt. Democracy survives not because leaders deserve obedience, but because procedures make them replaceable. Markets preserve knowledge through prices while permitting old firms to die. The achievement isn't choosing change over stability. It's building institutions that can change without collapsing. Now the room shifts because he isn't finished. And your binding instincts, they protect cohesion. Cohesion for whom? We're astonishingly good at binding the tribe together by drawing a circle around somebody else. Loyalty sounds admirable from inside the group. From outside, it's exclusion. Authority feels stabilizing when the hierarchy recognizes your dignity. Sanctity feels noble right up until someone decides you're contaminating the sacred order. Haidt pauses. That one rattles the room. His answer may be the strongest thing said all evening. You can't solve tribalism by pretending people no longer need tribes. Strip away religion, community, national identity, family obligation, local institutions. And people don't become disembodied Enlightenment philosophers calmly evaluating universal propositions. They go shopping for replacement tribes. Politics becomes religion. Lifestyle becomes identity. Ideology becomes sacred. The people most convinced they've escaped primitive moral psychology have often just given the elephant better vocabulary. Silence, not empty this time, tight. And Pinker concedes something real. Reason's fragile. Intelligence doesn't immunize anybody against motivated reasoning. Highly educated people simply become better lawyers for whatever their tribe already believed. Science and democracy work not because individuals become rational, but because institutions force competing biases to collide. And Haidt concedes the mirror image. Conservatism confuses survival with virtue. A practice can endure because powerful people benefit from it. The instinct to preserve becomes an excuse for postponing justice indefinitely. Sometimes the wall really should come down. So here's where we actually are, and it's stranger than left versus right. Haidt was never really asking whether traditions are good. He was asking a structural question. What's holding this up? And would you know before you removed it? Pinker was asking a moral question. Who's paying for the thing that's holding it up? And did anyone ask them? Those aren't the same question. They can't be answered with the same evidence, which is why neither man can win, and why the argument keeps regenerating in every generation. Openness sees the door nobody's tried. Preservation asks whether the door's holding up the ceiling. And civilization inconveniently has to answer both before somebody starts swinging a hammer. And that is the greater debate.
Let's invent again. Here's a problem that sounds abstract and isn't. In the early 1960s, a spacecraft leaving the inner solar system could send data home. But by the time that signal arrived, it was almost entirely buried in noise. Not a little noise. The message was a whisper inside a stadium. Engineers had mathematical codes that could protect the data in principle, convolutional codes, which wrapped each bit in a running history of the bits around it. The trouble was decoding them. To find the correct message, you'd theoretically have to check every possible sequence the transmitter might have sent, and the number of possibilities exploded so fast that the math was considered beautiful and useless in the same breath. The person who broke it arrived in America as a 4-year-old refugee. Andrew Viterbi was the only child of an Italian Jewish family that fled Bergamo just ahead of the war. He grew up in Boston, watched the Charles River, and decided he wanted MIT and a life as an engineer in the lineage of Marconi. He got both degrees from MIT, then Raytheon, then the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, working on exactly that problem of pulling a faint digital whisper out of interplanetary distance. By the mid-60s, he was teaching at UCLA and still wrestling with the same stubborn physics. His solution was to stop treating it as a search and start treating it as a path. Picture a trellis, a lattice of every possible route the message could have taken through time. At each step, most of those routes become measurably less likely than a competing route that arrives at the same place. So kill them. Don't evaluate them. Don't rank them. Just prune. What survives is the single most probable path through the whole structure, and you've found it without ever examining most of it. He published in 1967. A colleague told him nobody would ever use it commercially, and Viterbi admitted later that he half believed it. He never patented it. Now here's the unexpected part, and it comes in two pieces. The first is that the algorithm went everywhere. It suppressed interference on satellite links and deep space probes. It went into magnetic storage, speech recognition, and DNA sequence analysis. It sits inside every major digital cellular standard on Earth. It's running right now in billions of devices, and it earned its inventor nothing directly. The second piece is where the money actually was, and it wasn't in the math. In 1968, Viterbi started Linkabit with Irwin Jacobs and Leonard Kleinrock on $1,500. They sold it. In 1985, he and Jacobs started over with a company called Qualcomm, Quality Communications, and they weren't entirely sure what it would do. Early revenue came from a satellite tracking system for trucking fleets. Then, one of their engineers, Klein Gilhausen, asked a question the whole industry had already answered. If spread spectrum techniques can defeat deliberate military jamming, why not point them at the accidental interference in a cellular network? The industry's answer had been no. First-generation systems divided spectrum by frequency, and the digital successors would divide it by time. TDMA, the approach behind GSM. Clean, orthogonal, understood. Code division multiple access had been studied and shelved. Users near a tower would drown out distant ones. Frequency planning would be chaos. So Viterbi and his colleagues treated the chaos as the product. In CDMA, every transmission looks like noise to every other receiver, and the Viterbi algorithm was already the best tool ever built for finding a signal inside noise. The hard part wasn't the decoding. It was power control, making every handset transmit just enough energy to be heard and not 1 milliwatt more, adjusted hundreds of times a second. That unglamorous feedback loop was the actual invention. They demonstrated it publicly in San Diego in 1989. The Telecommunications Industry Association standardized it in 1993. By 2000, tens of millions of phones were running on it, and every third-generation standard that followed inherited the same insight. So notice what happened. Everyone was watching the algorithm, the elegant, publishable, unpatented object. The value turned out to be sitting one layer over in a boring closed-loop control problem that nobody wanted to write a paper about. Spread spectrum wasn't new. The math was free. What was scarce was the willingness to treat an unsolved practical constraint as the actual product, and to keep explaining it to carriers long after the industry had voted against it. That's it for another episode of Wealth and Means, advice dressed up like hard work.
We hope you enjoyed the arc. From a language model that fits under your desk to a rare earth ticker that moved before anybody could explain it, the leak you stop instead of the percent you chase, and the wall you'd better check before you take it down. The pattern was simple. Value moves sideways.
Subscribe, rate, and share this episode. It helps more than you think.
We do this for you to help you have a better week, a sharper mind, and maybe even a longer attention span.
And a special thanks to our sponsor, agentweekly.ai.
Till next time, stay curious.
Stay kind.
And keep compounding.